Hello, my name is Emma Carter, and I'm 24 years old. I want to tell you a story about the time my life turned upside down, and how I found a way to stand back up. It's a story about pain, betrayal, and finding strength when you least expect it. 2 years ago, when I was 22, I was diagnosed with cancer. It felt like my world shattered in an instant. The doctor said my treatment would be long and difficult, but I was ready to fight. What I wasn't ready for was my parents walking out on me. "We can't do this," my mom said one morning after a doctor's appointment. Her words were cold, distant. "It's too much for us, Emma. You'll be better off staying with your grandfather." I remember standing there, frozen, as my dad nodded in agreement. They didn't even look guilty, they just seemed relieved, as if I were a burden they couldn't wait to get rid of. Within days, they packed up their things and left me behind. At first, I couldn't process what was happening. How could my own parents leave me when I needed them the most? But my grandfather, Alexander, was there to pick up the pieces. He took me into his modest home, held my hand through every chemo session, and reminded me every single day that I wasn't alone. "Emma, you're stronger than you think," he'd say, his voice steady and kind. "You'll get through this, and when you do, you'll have a future worth fighting for." Grandpa Harold was everything my parents weren't. He was patient, generous, and loving. Even though he was nearing 80, he made sure I had everything I needed. He cooked for me, sat with me during the worst nights, and told me stories from his younger days to distract me from the pain. He became my whole world. Then, one day, as I was finally starting to feel stronger, he surprised me. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the trees, when he placed a thick envelope in my lap. "What's this?" I asked, puzzled. "Your future," he said with a small smile. Inside the envelope was paperwork transferring his entire $10 million inheritance to me. I was speechless. Grandpa had always lived simply, never showing signs of his wealth. I couldn't believe he trusted me with such a huge responsibility. "Why would you do this for me?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. "Because you deserve it," he said firmly. "And I want you to have the freedom to live your life on your terms." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him. In that moment, I realized just how lucky I was to have him in my corner. But not everyone was as supportive as Grandpa. My parents suddenly reappeared in my life, acting like nothing had happened. They claimed they wanted to reconnect, but their sudden interest in me didn't feel genuine. Something about it didn't sit right. I didn't know it yet, but their return was just the beginning of a storm I wasn't prepared for. When my parents showed up at Grandpa's house, I was shocked. It had been almost 2 years since they walked out on me, and now here they were, standing on the porch with forced smiles and a basket of fruit. "Emma, look at you, sweetheart," my mom said, her voice overly cheerful. "You're looking so much better." I didn't respond right away. My grandfather was sitting next to me, his expression calm but guarded. He didn't trust them either. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "We've been so worried about you," my dad chimed in, his tone dripping with insincerity. "We just thought it was time to reconnect. We're still a family, after all." Family. The word made my stomach twist. Where was this family when I was hooked up to machines, fighting for my life? Where were they when Grandpa and I were struggling to pay hospital bills? I glanced at Grandpa, who gave me a slight nod. He always let me take the lead when it came to handling my parents. "I don't think you get to call yourself my family anymore," I said, crossing my arms. "You left me when I needed you the most. Now, all of a sudden, you're worried about me." My mom's face flushed, but she quickly recovered. "Emma, we made a mistake. We thought it would be better for you to stay with your grandfather. We were under a lot of stress. That's a funny way of saying you abandoned me, I shot back. Emma, my dad interrupted, his tone firmer now. We're trying to make things right. Can't you see that? I didn't believe them for a second, and neither did Grandpa. He stood up, his tall frame towering over them despite his age. Emma has done just fine without you, he said, his voice steady but sharp. If you're here because you genuinely care, then you'll respect her boundaries. If not, you're wasting your time. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. Clearly, this wasn't the warm welcome they were expecting. But instead of leaving, they doubled down. Grandpa Harold, my mom began, her tone suddenly sweet, we were just hoping to spend some quality time with Emma. Maybe we could all sit down together and talk things through. Before Grandpa could respond, I cut in. What do you really want? I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. They didn't answer right away, but the truth came out soon enough. A few weeks later, their intentions became crystal clear. My parents started dropping by more frequently, always unannounced. At first, they pretended to care about my health and how I was adjusting to life after cancer. But their questions quickly shifted. How are you handling Grandpa's finances? My mom asked casually one day. It must be overwhelming for someone your age. I'm managing just fine, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. That's great, my dad added. You know, if you ever need help, your mother and I would be happy to step in. We have experience with this sort of thing. I could feel the anger bubbling inside me. They didn't care about me, they cared about the $10 million Grandpa had transferred to my name. When they started hinting that I should consider sharing the inheritance with them, I'd had enough. You're not getting a penny, I told them firmly. This money is for my future, not yours. They tried to argue, but I didn't let them. Grandpa backed me up, reminding them that they had no legal claim to the inheritance. Still, they didn't give up. After weeks of their manipulative behavior, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when they'd try something drastic. Grandpa, I said one evening, what do you think about moving to the countryside? Just the two of us. He smiled, his eyes lighting up. I think that sounds like a wonderful idea. Within a month, we packed up and left the city behind. We moved to a small rural town, surrounded by rolling hills and quiet streets. It was everything I needed, a fresh start, far away from my parents and their greed. And for the first time in a long time, I finally felt at peace. Life in the countryside was peaceful and fulfilling. Grandpa and I started a small heirloom business, restoring and selling antique furniture. I found joy in simple things, sunrise walks, gardening, and connecting with the community. I learned to let go of my anger and focus on the people who truly cared about me. Grandpa's wisdom and kindness had shown me what real love looked like, and I knew I would never settle for less. As for my parents, I forgave them in my heart, not for their sake, but for mine. They had taught me a painful lesson, but I had come out stronger on the other side. And with Grandpa by my side, I knew the best chapters of my life were still ahead. Life in the countryside continued to bloom in ways I never imagined. The heirloom business Grandpa and I had started gained unexpected attention from collectors. Our passion for restoring forgotten treasures resonated with people searching for meaningful pieces for their homes. One day, while dusting off an old rocking chair that Grandpa had restored to perfection, a man in his mid-30s walked into our shop. His name was Robert Carter, a local historian. He had heard about our business and wanted to collaborate on a project to restore artifacts from an abandoned mansion nearby. This place has been untouched for decades, Robert explained. The family left everything behind. I want to preserve its history, and I think your skills could bring it back to life. Grandpa's eyes sparkled with excitement. That sounds like an adventure, he said. What do you think, Emma? I hesitated. It sounded like a big commitment, but something about Robert's enthusiasm and sincerity made me curious. Let's do it, I finally agreed. The mansion restoration project turned out to be more than just restoring furniture. While exploring the attic, I stumbled upon a dusty old journal tucked away in a forgotten corner. Its leather cover was cracked with age, and the pages were filled with elegant handwriting. When I opened it, I froze. The journal belonged to my grandfather. "What's this doing here?" I asked him later that evening, handing him the book. Grandpa looked at it silently for a moment before letting out a deep sigh. "I didn't think this would ever surface," he said. "There's something you need to know." The journal revealed a secret about my parents that Grandpa had kept hidden for years. They hadn't just abandoned me out of fear of my illness, they had been drowning in debt due to reckless spending and gambling. When Grandpa refused to bail them out, they turned their backs on both of us. "They didn't just leave you, Emma," Grandpa said, his voice heavy with emotion. "They wanted me to sell everything I had to cover their mistakes. When I refused, they left." Suddenly, everything made sense, their obsession with my inheritance, their attempts to manipulate me. It wasn't just about greed, it was about desperation. Robert became a regular presence in my life during the mansion restoration. His easygoing nature and genuine interest in my story made it hard not to open up to him. Slowly, I began to trust him, sharing parts of my life that I hadn't told anyone outside of Grandpa. "You've been through so much," Robert said one evening as we worked on restoring an ornate bookshelf. "But you've built something amazing here. That takes strength." His words stuck with me. For the first time in years, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope for the future. As life moved forward, Grandpa's health began to decline. He had always been strong and full of energy, but age was catching up with him. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he took my hand. "Emma, I've lived a full life," he said softly. "And I've never been prouder of anyone than I am of you. Promise me you'll keep building this life you've created, no matter what." Tears streamed down my face as I promised him. A few months later, Grandpa passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy of love and resilience. After Grandpa's passing, I poured myself into the business and the community he had loved so much. Robert and I grew closer, and with his encouragement, I expanded our heirloom business into a thriving restoration company. We even held workshops to teach others how to preserve their own family treasures. One day, while going through some of Grandpa's belongings, I found a second letter he had written to me. Inside was a deed to another property, a cabin deep in the woods that he had always dreamed of restoring. "This is your next adventure," the letter read. "Live your life boldly, Emma. You've earned it." With Robert by my side and the memory of Grandpa's wisdom guiding me, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. Looking back, I realized my journey wasn't just about surviving cancer or escaping my parents' toxic influence. It was about finding myself, creating a life of meaning, and honoring the people who truly cared for me. As I stood outside the cabin Grandpa had left for me, I smiled. The future was wide open.